look for ways to try to ease our minds, forced into a change. I guess it had to be this way. But do your best to try to stay awake. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try. So hold on to the love, don't you be afraid. There come a time when you will have your say, and don't forget to pray the Lord to keep us safe. We will live to fight another day. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try. I can feel it coming, I can see it miles away. I can feel the sun of brighter days. I can hear the laughter, I can see your smiling face. I can feel the love that's on the way. The day they closed the world, we all went inside, looking for the light. The day they closed the world, we all realized what it means to try. The day they closed the world, we all went outside, looking for the light. I can feel it coming, I can see it miles away. I can feel the sun of brighter days. I can hear the laughter, I can see your smiling face. I can feel the love that's on the way. I can feel it coming, I can feel it coming. I can feel it coming, I can feel it coming.
Do not fear, Saf is here, and this is Saf Buxy from Saf Surgery. Welcome, guys. What a week it's been. Let me tell you what we're about. This is Saf Surgery. We're in collaboration with Spiritually Gone Wild, Love Coach Academy, and we are here to give you a message of hope. And wow, what a guest we got today! And just before I introduce this fine guest, and all week, when I found out that he is coming on my show on Saf Surgery, I've been like, hoo-ha, ferocious, aren't I? How did I get this chap? Let me tell you about him. He's a revolutionary recovery specialist, and addiction's my game. He's a best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and he's also a treatment consultant. Without further ado, I mean, I can't wait. I mean, I could go on for ages, and I've got so many questions to ask him. But without further ado, let me introduce you, the one and only TJ Woodward. TJ, how you doing, man?
I am great. Thank you so much, Saf. I'm really, really grateful and excited to be with you. And, you know, I love being in conversation about how we're beginning to really shift the whole paradigm around addiction and recovery. So I'm grateful to be here today.
Well, I'm grateful to have you here. I mean, the other day, I don't know where I saw it, but you've been sober and abstinent for 34 years, is it? Something like that?
It is 34 years. Yeah, just last
34
week.
years, man.
Thank
Fantastic,
you.
man. Fantastic. I mean, throughout the show, we're gonna find out how you've done such, you know, so much sobriety, and it's obviously a lot of hard work. But you, like, you know, I read a lot of your stuff. I watch a lot of your stuff. I've read your book, Conscious Recovery, which was just phenomenal. I've seen loads of your YouTube videos, and you just inspire me. Absolutely inspire me, and I'm so grateful to have you on this show today, because I know that you are going to give one hell of a message to people out there who are listening, people who are in addiction and people who are not in addiction, because you know it's a whole life change what you preach, if you like, but in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, I mean, I had so much pain in my life, so much disconnection, so much shame. And I found a way out, and that way out was given to me as a gift from multiple different people. And so I'm incredibly grateful and honored to share that, which, you know, that's what's become Conscious Recovery, is really my 34 years of experience of my own recovery, and then working with other people, helping them break the cycle of their addiction. But as you said, it's really ultimately not about the addiction. It's really more about how we live our life on purpose and deeply connected with the truth of who we are.
Most definitely. What I would like to do is go back previously to the 34 years of sobriety, so prior, and maybe talk a little bit about when you were in the madness. And I always call it the madness. Again, I say that respectfully. When you were in the chaos of addiction, could you tell me a little bit and tell the audience a little bit about how that was for you, and what were your drugs or behavior choices?
Yeah, absolutely. Ecstasy was my thing. It was the birthplace of ecstasy where I was at. That could be a whole other conversation. I guess they call it Molly now. You know, I'd have to keep up with all the terms. But what I want to say is that I was really searching. I don't view addiction as the problem, but more of a solution, right? And obviously, I'm not the only one that's ever said that. But to me, it was a solution that actually worked pretty well in the beginning. I remember the first time I used ecstasy, and I remember feeling, I felt like I was again when I was a little kid, happy, filled with joy, open-hearted, connected. Now, you know, the issue is it didn't continue to work that way, obviously, or I wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you. But in the beginning, it was a strategy that actually worked really well for me, because it helped me to have some relief from the psychic pain and the spiritual disconnection that I had experienced for many, many years prior to the first time I picked up drugs and alcohol.
Wow. And at what age were you when you first had an E? We call it little fellas here. In England, we call them little fellas.
Well, when I first picked up ecstasy, it was 1985, so I was almost 20. I was 19.
19. So you were on that for about a year and a half, and then you decided that's it. No drugs, no alcohol, no nothing really. Was that? How did it happen?
Yeah.
What was that moment?
That moment, you know, I actually think it's important to talk about that moment. So thank you for asking. Not a lot of people ask that question in interviews. The moment for me was really much longer than a moment. It was, like I said, that experience, the first time of using whatever we call it, Molly E, was this transformational experience. It was almost transcendent. But then the next time, which by the way was the very next day, when I tried it again, it didn't quite work that same way. So it was actually 1 year to the day that I got sober, a year later, June of '86. And that year was filled with emptiness, pain, trying to take more and more and more drugs to try to, you know, recapture that time, that first time that it did feel really magical for me. So it's important for me to say that, because it wasn't that there was this decision that happened where I said, okay, enough. what happened was the last 6 months in particular of my using was so empty. What once brought me relief was starting to make me feel more disconnected, more empty, more lonely. And I reached a place where I felt very, very desperate. And a friend of mine had gotten into recovery and kind of showed me the way in the beginning stages, found a support group that helped me. And it wasn't so much that it was a conscious decision as much as it was, I felt so empty and disconnected. And when I discovered a way out, it was like relief, finally.
It was like a big weight lifted off your shoulders. And it's because I remember when I first came into recovery, I had that same feeling. It was like, wow, you know what, there is a life after drinking drugs. There is and it's a very good life. And I've had a fantastic life, you know, ever since I came to recovery. And I know you have. Now you compiled a program called the Conscious Recovery Method.
Yes.
And I've read your book. I've heard a lot of your story. Could you talk us through your program and how you came about it, and when did you first start developing that?
Well, I started developing it not consciously, but through my own recovery about 2 years into recovery, because, you know, we talked about what a relief it was to be sober, what a relief it was to stop using drugs. But about 2 years in, what happened for me is all of the unresolved trauma that I had yet worked through, that sense of disconnection came back. I had a lot of shame. It was then that I realized I felt broken and damaged. So I met a woman that changed my life. Her name was Mary Helen, and she introduced me to a really different way of looking at recovery. So I could say that it started really about 1988 when I took this journey of moving inward. The foundational principle of conscious recovery, and this is what makes it different than other approaches, is that underneath all addictive behavior is an essential self that's whole and perfect. What I have experienced is many, if not most, of the support groups, the treatment modalities, all of the perspective, the medical perspective, is looking for what's broken. You know, in the Western medical model, we look, what are the symptoms? How do we eradicate them? But with addiction, yes, the symptom is the addiction, whether it's food or sex or shopping or drugs or alcohol. When we remove those symptoms without addressing the underlying issues, not only might we return to drugs and alcohol or whatever our addiction is, but we're living a life that feels really empty. So conscious recovery recognizes that underneath all of that is an essential self that's whole and perfect. And when we start to become curious about that, it's a game changer.
Wow. And I like that music.
What's that?
Could you hear that? I don't know what that music was. That was weird. Did you hear that music, guy?
I did not hear any music.
I had some music on my thing. That's amazing. Sorry, I lost my thought there. Oh, God, live TV, eh? Things happen. You know what I think is? I've got my AirPods on. And I think my son's put his music on, and it's gone straight to my. Anyway, that's another thing. Hoo-ha! Put that music down. But anyway, so yeah, one of those things. So what I'm interested to find out is when you were in active addiction, you were a student, I'm assuming, at that time.
I actually didn't go to school, right? So I graduated from high school and my addiction really took off. I took some time off. I actually didn't go back to education until I was in my 30s, in my late 30s. So there was a period of time. And I think that, that could be part of it, right? I felt really lost. I felt like I didn't have purpose. I didn't know what was mine to do. And so that was definitely part of it. I wasn't in school. I was working full time and really didn't have a lot of joy in my life. So that's all part of the equation of why my addiction took off at that time.
Yeah. And what kind of what line of work were you in?
At that time, I was working in retail.
Okay, retail. Okay, so so when you came into recovery, a few years after recovery, you started studying, and you started getting involved in the addiction recovery side of things. What was the main? I mean, was it your addiction? Was that the main catalyst for you to get involved with addiction?
Well, I think that was the beginning, of course, because I felt like it was a gift that I had received so freely that I wanted to give back. And in the early years, I did a lot of volunteering at different treatment programs. I would go into adolescent treatment programs and help facilitate groups. When I moved to San Francisco in '91, I worked at an addiction treatment center here, facilitating groups. So in the beginning, it was that. But what I realized pretty quickly in working in the field was that I had a different approach that I felt like was important to bring to the equation. Because, like I said, so many of the modalities were focused on what's broken, looking at what's wrong with a person, labeling someone, diagnosing someone. And I realized that the observer has such a profound effect. I had started studying a lot of different spirituality. I'd gone to India on this spiritual quest. I was part of the New Thought movement, attending Unity. And I realized that there's powerful principles there that really helped my life so much that I wanted to bring those into the addiction recovery world, if you will.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, these modalities that you talk about, okay, because there's so many. See, for me, whatever works works. If it keeps you
Correct.
clean and sober, I don't care what you do. If it works, right? For me, in the beginning, the 12 steps, it was such a massive thing for me in the beginning. It worked, but I used it more as a life-changing program as opposed to a program just to give up drinking drugs. So for me, the 12 steps worked great, and then I got involved in the field myself, and I guess you could probably relate to when I say that helping others helps yourself as well. Did you ever experience the 12 steps yourself? And if so, how did you find it? If not, why not?
Yes. So I got sober in 12 step, changed my life. Like you're saying, it really helped me to shift my perspective. It brought me back to myself. The main thing that I'll say about that was the support, having so many well-intended people. And that's the beauty of 12-step programs. You can go pretty much anywhere in the world. And for the most part, there's a room full of people that really want to help you. So the fellowship, as we would call it in 12-step, is something that has been really important to me. Now, my journey over time has taken me away from 12-step. But I want to be really clear. I love 12-step and I think it's incredible and it's saving millions of lives. Conscious recovery, when I created it, I was very clear that it wasn't intended to be a substitute for 12-step or anything else, but something that's in addition to. Because what I did discover in my own journey around 20 years sober was there was another deepening that needed to happen, another deepening of addressing the shame, the disconnection, and the unresolved trauma. And although that does happen in 12-step meetings, I wanted to provide some very specific tools that would help people unlearn all of that so they can return back to their essential self.
Are you a religious person yourself, TJ? Do you believe in God?
I am not a religious person. I would say, as cliche as it sounds, spiritual, but not religious. Obviously, I think religion, again, has saved millions of people, and people find a great deal of comfort in that. The God question is tricky. God is one of those words that I think can be really loaded because there's so many preconceived ideas. For me, it's energy. It's the essential beingness. I remember coming into the world so connected, so open-hearted. To me, that's spirituality, that it's the essential self. Now, for some, that includes a religious path, and for some, that doesn't. I suppose, Buddhism would be a little bit more my leaning. Eastern thought has been something that has been really transformational for me. I actually grew up Anglican, Church of England, and I loved it. I'm grateful for that. And I can recognize that there was a foundation that was built not so much in a belief system, but in an experience. I shared with you earlier, the last time I was in the UK was in 1979. And I came there to sing. I sang at St. Paul's Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, and toured. I sang in Canterbury Cathedral. there was something mystical about being in those magical places to me. So even very early, even though I wasn't necessarily picking up on or even necessarily congruent with some of the beliefs, the energy, I can still go into a cathedral and just feel my heart open because of the consciousness that has been there. So I guess, I don't know if you can get an answer from that. I would say yes and, not no, I'm not interested in religion. I love religious art for one thing, but early on for me, the energy, the experience was far more important than the belief system.
What kind of genre of music do you sing? You said everything, and all I'm focused on the singing side. You're gonna have to do a little song for me.
Well, it's been a while, but I grew up actually singing in a very traditional men and boys church choir in Indiana, and you know, very much in the English tradition. So that was my background at that time, and you know, that was also a very magical experience. I remember I had one of my most profound spiritual experiences in St. Paul's Cathedral. We were rehearsing late at night, and we were the only ones in the room, and I think the janitor was sweeping and the lights were off and the cathedral was dark, and we were rehearsing, and there was this moment, one of my favorite moments musically, and we just paused, and the reverberation, there was something magical, and I remember feeling my heart open. So there is definitely a connection for me, and of course I can't wait to come back and be in St. Paul's Cathedral again. It's hard for me to imagine. I haven't been there since '79.
It's that's changed, and the whole of London has changed. So you'll be you'll be shocked, but it's a great city, London, and you're always welcome, yes. TJ, and you're welcome obviously at my place anytime. And
thank you.
I can't wait to have you here. What I want to touch on now is about your actual program, because you do teachings and you do training, and how do you do it? Where do you do it? If people want to find you, where can they find you? Obviously, we know you've got a website, and how long does it take? Could you tell us a bit about that, please?
Yeah, so there are many different ways to access conscious recovery. The number one way is I've created an online course now, and a course isn't necessarily the right word. I call it an experience, and it's me walking an individual through the entire conscious recovery process. Looking at the root causes of addiction, how we break the cycle of addiction, create safety in our life, and then move into a life filled with meaning and purpose. So if you go to my website, or it's a wholehearted.org.
Yeah, carry on, TJ. So I'm gonna put your website on the bottom so people can see it. Yeah, carry on, please. Sorry, yeah, go on. There we go. Yeah. TJWoodward.com. Yeah.
So that's the course for individuals. I also have clinical trainings for spiritual leaders, for therapists, for counselors, for coaches. If they want to have a different approach to addiction, there's also a fully immersive online course for professionals that we just launched. But one of the things that I'm most passionate about is I also partner with treatment programs, and they become conscious recovery certified programs, and they adopt the whole system of care, which includes curriculum. But I go in and do a 2-day training with staff, and that training primarily is, what does it mean to hold space? Because if we go back to the original conversation about viewing people as broken, well-meaning therapists and counselors are often trained to diagnose and treat. And of course, I understand the value of that. But what often happens is clients end up getting labeled or viewed as their diagnosis, or they are an addict. And I think that creates more separation and more shame. So the conscious recovery method is a whole system of care of looking at what happens when we actually look for the spiritual wholeness in the person rather than what's broken. So I'm really excited about all the different avenues. We also have an online conscious recovery meeting every Thursday evening that just launched. So that's something as well.
And you're there live yourself in the meeting?
I'm there live most weeks. Most weeks I'm there. Yeah.
I've got a couple of messages that I would like to read.
Okay.
And this is, you've already got a semi-little fan base in the UK. And this is from a very good friend of mine. Her name is Natalie, so shout out to Natalie. Could you please say hi to Natalie, TJ?
Hi, Natalie.
Her words were, the way you speak touches every fiber of her being.
Oh, thank you.
She says it's like her truth. It's so incredibly articulated. So she loves it. She's got a question for you.
Yes.
The question is, TJ has a vision of his work to eventually be incorporated in 1,000 treatment centers. How far has his vision been realized, and does he have any ambition to bring it to the United Kingdom, baby? Unless you already have, do you know what I mean? The baby
No.
bit's my bit, but I got excited. Come to the UK, man. We need you. Yeah. So,
I
did you
love
get that question? Yeah.
Yes, Natalie, thank you so much. And it's really interesting. That vision has been modified, and I now say I want conscious recovery to be in every treatment center on planet Earth. How's that? Because why not? So we're still very, very early. As a matter of fact, all of the certified treatment programs right now are in California. COVID has kind of slowed things a little bit. There are programs in Arizona. There are more programs in Southern California, one on the East Coast of the United States that is interested in becoming a certified program. I would love to be in the UK. Right now, there are 8 conscious recovery certified treatment programs, and there are at least 24 that are interested. We're kind of waiting for things to I don't want to say get back to normal, but where I can start traveling and doing trainings again. So I think by the end of this year, we'll be well on our way to attaining that number.
Well, we'd love to see you in the UK. I'm just reading something that early this year, you were given a distinct honor of being selected as a thought leader on wholehearted.org, along the with the likes of the great Brené Brown and of course Dr. Gabor Mate, who I've personally seen myself. How was that for you?
Well, it's a huge honor. The vision of wholehearted.org is to bring together different thought leaders all over the world that have a transformational message. And it's a platform where you can see talks and interviews, but also get courses from all the people that you listed, Seth. And then also Mark Lundholm. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a comedian who delivers a powerful message about recovery. So it is a huge honor. And I've actually been in the Wholehearted Studios for over a year now, creating content. So our first 3 products, Conscious Recovery for Individuals, Conscious Recovery for Professionals, and then soon to launch Conscious Recovery for Treatment Programs. And that's for a program that wants to use conscious recovery, but I wouldn't go in and do the trainings for. So we wanted to be able to offer multiple different ways for people to experience conscious recovery.
Thank you for that. I have another question. And the question is, how effective is conscious recovery or your work with people with eating disorders, especially anorexia nervosa and bulimia and so forth?
Well, I want to say the important part of conscious recovery that I always want to say is that there's an Indian proverb that says we're like a house with 4 rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. Conscious recovery tends to focus on the emotional and the spiritual. And so it's not the one answer. And I think it's really important for me to say that because, a good friend of mine says a wrench is a really great tool, but it doesn't fix everything. And conscious recovery is a really great tool, but it might not fix everything. But when it's partnered with or integrated into a program that's addressing the physical and the intellectual as well as the emotional and spiritual, it can be really profound. In conscious recovery, I identified the 3 root causes of addiction as unresolved trauma, spiritual disconnection, and toxic shame. And I've worked a lot with people who have eating disorders, and trauma is 100% of the time at the root of that. And I can say that with a lot of confidence, right? Because I think trauma is at the root of a lot of, if not all of, addiction. Because again, addiction isn't the problem, it's a solution to something. It's managing something. And if we come into this world deeply connected with the truth of who we are, and then we get taught that there's something wrong with us, or that we're not good enough, or because of the color of our skin, or our gender, or our socioeconomic status, it means this, right? We get programmed. And so when it comes to eating disorders, usually that is a strategy to manage, you might even say control something that might feel out of control internally. And so conscious recovery is a tool that can really help people reconnect with their deeper truth so they're not living out of that trauma.
Yeah. Thank you. That's amazing. And I'd have to agree with you because I've worked in prison services. I work in the community. I do a lot of work in addiction, and literally 100% of the clients that I work with have suffered or experienced some kind of trauma. Not to say that everyone who's experienced trauma becomes an addict. I'm not saying that, but everyone who I've worked with, who is an addict, has experienced trauma. Did you experience trauma when you were younger?
Yeah, and let's talk about trauma. I think it's an important topic because when we talk about trauma, I think a lot of times we tend to look at trauma like sexual abuse, physical abuse, a war zone. I worked with multiple clients that had some connection with 9/11. They were either there or they lost someone in 9/11. So obviously that is trauma. And there's a framework in our industry where they say big T, little t trauma. I am not a huge fan of that because one of the things that's important is we don't want to compare our trauma to someone else, right? So if let's imagine I'm in treatment and the person sitting next to me was sexually abused and the person sitting next to that person was beaten every day, it might be hard for me to say, well, I have this traumatic experience too. So I have a few different things that were really traumatic for me. Some of them that would seem really insignificant to some. And that's why it's really important to say that it's not about comparing our trauma. Something that seemed so benign was such a big moment in my life. I was in kindergarten. I couldn't tie my shoes. I remember sitting in the back of the kindergarten room. I can remember this, Saf, like it was yesterday. That I can tell you what the chairs looked like, what the floors looked like. It was this moment where I decided I was stupid. And it felt like everyone else knew how to do it, but I didn't. Now, the teacher sent me home with a wooden board with 2 shoes attached to it. And this was back in the day when we walked home from school. And I remember walking home and repeating to myself, I am so stupid. I am so stupid. I am so stupid. And that belief, that core false belief got concretized into my unconscious. And that was a driving force. You talked about education. I didn't go to school after high school because I felt like I was stupid. It was something that stayed with me. So that was a traumatic experience. There were obviously a lot more. I have sexual trauma in my history. Being a little gay boy in Indiana in the 1970s didn't go over very well with a lot of people. So that's a traumatic experience for me. But just being born on planet Earth and being taught about competition, good and bad, right and wrong, all the isms, all of that was a traumatic experience for me spiritually. So that's kind of a long answer, but yes, I have multiple layers of different types of trauma.
And you think that the different traumas that you just spoke about, you thinking that you're stupid, your sexuality being challenged in, I'm assuming, in a very bad way, in a very disrespectful way, was it all that led you to drinking drugs?
Well, I think one of the key practices in conscious recovery, and I think this is really important, because of traumatic experiences, we disconnect from our true nature, right? So at a very early age, I remember building a wall around my heart. At 7, I remember like it was yesterday, sitting at my dining room table and a wall going around my heart. that was what we, might call a defense mechanism. I call them brilliant strategies. I call addiction a brilliant strategy, or anything else we use to manage. Underneath that brilliant strategy of the wall that I built were these core false beliefs. I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, and I'm stupid. The key, and this is what conscious recovery helps people do, is the key to this is, let's use some of the other modalities. It's not a cognitive process. I was 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old in recovery, and I could intellectually understand that I wasn't stupid, but it was my 5-year-old that decided that. So the healing was creating a safe space to start giving attention to that little 5-year-old that made these core decisions. So to answer your question, absolutely, it was those traumatic experiences that led to my addiction. But even more accurately, it was what I decided about myself and the world because of these traumatic experiences that created this sense of disconnection and shame. I felt unworthy, and of course I medicated that. And when I started using drugs and alcohol, there was relief. So I longed for more and more of that.
I'm going to put you on the spot here now, TJ. And I'm going to put the client hat on.
Yep.
At the age of 11, I'm an only child. I was adopted when I was born, but I didn't know that at that time. At the age of 11, I went to boarding school. For 6 years, I was living in hell. I was physically, verbally, racially, sexually abused on a daily basis for 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Alcohol was the only thing that got me through those 6 years.
Right.
And not only did it get me through what I'd already experienced the week before, it got me ready for the week that I knew that was gonna come up.
Right.
And for an 11-year-old to go through that, when I reflect back, is quite a, it was, I don't know how I got through it. I don't know how I survived.
Yeah.
But I did. I think, and out of all the abuse that I mentioned, I think the biggest thing was the humiliation. The humiliation out of all, and I'm talking that even ahead of the sexual, I guess it was all humiliation. In fact, all the abuse that came in. Anyways, and that's the only way I knew how to handle things. And up to adulthood, I found drugs and I got a bit of control back. It's like the abused becomes the abuser, but I never abused in that way, but in a different way of hanging around with people with control. And how would you guide someone who came with you with a story like that by using conscious recovery method?
Absolutely. And you're not putting me on the spot at all. This is exactly, I feel very passionate about this. It's not a one session moment, right? So we're not going to have the specific answer right in this moment, but I'm going to share with you what the process of conscious recovery is and how we can start to heal the underlying trauma. Starting with, do you remember a time before that happened that you felt connected with yourself, that you felt happy? Do you remember coming into this world or being a little kid and being happy?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. So starting, that's the foundation, a recognition that underneath all of that, can you imagine that there's still that whole and perfect being underneath all of that trauma for you?
Yeah.
And so we start with being curious about that. And then in conscious recovery, when we look at the 3 root causes, unresolved trauma, which we just spoke about, do you have a sense that you disconnected from yourself in some way during that trauma?
Oh God, yeah, 100%. 100%.
So that's the second. And then do you have a sense of developing shame about yourself, feeling broken in some way, feeling damaged?
Yeah.
So then we identify, and again, I wouldn't normally walk someone through this, in a group or in a session so quickly, but so you've identified those 3 root causes. And then in conscious recovery, we look at the first step of recovery as creating safety. And so external safety is important, but the deeper safety is actually internal. As you know, Saf, when we have so much trauma and shame and disconnection, we usually have a lot of different strategies to escape that, to manage it, to bury it, to numb it out. So we want to start by recognizing the most important first step is learning how to be present with what might be some of these uncomfortable feelings. So you've identified that the trauma that you experienced, the drugs and alcohol were bringing you relief, right?
It was getting me away from all that. It was a combination of fear, survival, acceptance in a funny kind of way, doing something out of the ordinary at such a young age, and all that, it got me through that trauma, I guess.
So recognizing the brilliance that it once was, what happened when you got sober? Were you left with some of these underlying feelings?
I think the years leading up to sobriety, I caused so much chaos, like so many addicts do, and I hurt so many people. I can't keep thinking that if I didn't go through what I went through, I may not have done all that. But then again, if I didn't go through what I went through, I wouldn't be here today,
right?
Helping people and speaking to people like yourself. So it's like, I'm just happy that I survived what I went through. But nobody should go through what I went through. Nobody should go through that.
Yeah, and a lot of times when we talk about shame, because 100% of the clients I've worked with, and absolutely in my own life, we carry these shame beliefs about ourselves, right? I'm broken, I'm damaged, I shouldn't have done that. Often we think, I feel ashamed because I did that. But I actually look at the opposite of that. Is it possible that I did that because I felt ashamed? Now, you already touched on that, right? Because of the trauma, the disconnection, the shame, we end up hurting other people. And it's usually not conscious, but in our attempt to manage or to deal with the shame and the disconnection, we often end up hurting other people. A simpler way to say it is hurt people hurt people. Now, I've done a lot of harm in the world, and 100% of the time, it was because I didn't remember the truth of who I am. I was believing myself to be a false self. I thought I was broken. I thought I was damaged. This is why I have kind of a fundamental issue with some of the support groups and the treatment modalities that then come and say, yeah, you're selfish, you're self-centered, that's your problem, you need to stop doing that. Well, yes, nothing could be truer, but less useful. We want to look at what is it about that? Why am I acting that way? Again, those are the symptoms. I can change my behavior. And obviously it's important, like let's say I've stolen something from someone. It's important as part of my recovery to pay that money back. But if I'm carrying shame about it, I pay the money back, but then I don't feel better. As a matter of fact, I might even feel worse. So we want to get down to where that shame originated. And that's the next part of conscious recovery, is unlearning. How do I unlearn all those ideas and beliefs that I have picked up from the world, these core false beliefs about myself? Can we create a safe space to start unlearning those? And it really does involve going back to when we were really young and all of this happened, starting to unlearn that, not in an intellectual way, but a more experiential way.
But what do you do, TJ, when the one person you've hurt is still in your life and they're still hurt, even though they see the change in me? And however I feel that I've transformed for the better and taken a different path, I can't change what I've done to them.
Right.
How does anyone get through that as the perpetrator, abuser, whatever you want to call it?
Well, it starts with, there's a paradox here. I can't do someone else's healing for them, but I can also be open, because we hear this a lot, Saf, and I know you've heard this a lot. The person that's in the addiction stops the behavior. They get sober. They're 4 months sober. They're 5 months sober. And they're like, well, I've changed. I don't know why everyone's still upset or why everyone's still hurt. Right. So honoring someone else's healing path is an important aspect of that. Creating an authentic space. So I believe, and I have experienced, that healing can happen no matter what. And what it takes is curiosity, openness, and presence. So if you can be open with this person and available and recognize that they have their own path of healing, that you can participate not only by, changing your behavior and making amends for what happened, but really being curious about how you can support them in their journey.
Yeah, and it's total sense what you're saying there. It really is. Well, what makes it difficult is when it comes up again in the conversation, and it can be a potential trigger for myself. It can bring me down again after everything that I feel that I've changed to move forward, and it actually hurts me that I'm still hurting.
Of course. So let's talk about something, because I think it's really important, and I really appreciate that you use the word trigger. Part of conscious recovery is I've changed some of the language that we commonly use. Trigger is one of them. I've changed it to activation, and I'm going to tell you why. Often we'll say, she triggered me when she said that, or he triggered me, or that liquor store triggered me. But it's something outside of ourselves when we use the word trigger. When we get curious about what got touched, in other words, it's not your words that hurt me, it's that you touched a wound. The wound is getting touched because it's wanting to heal. And so transparency and vulnerability are the key, I think, to healing. So let's imagine this person says something and it starts with, that triggered me. Then become curious and say, wow, I wonder what got touched, what got activated. And so it could be shame. It could be, I notice I feel a wave of sadness. If you can share that in the moment, healing, you can create a greater space for healing. Wow, I notice I just went into a lot of shame. I noticed that I'm feeling a lot of sadness. You might even notice defensiveness, right? I notice I want to project or blame. Be curious about that. Sit with that. Take a deep breath. And in an intimate relationship where you have permission to share with each other, because we know the formula, when you blank, I feel blank. I actually just like to take the first part out and just transparently share, wow, I'm noticing I feel really sad. Maybe there's an opening there. Maybe it's okay for you to feel sad, right? I think sometimes we use the term negative emotions. I don't think emotions are negative. There's no such thing in my estimation as a positive or negative emotion. The reason this is important is if I label something as negative, I want to get rid of it. But if I'm having an emotion, it's information, it's asking something, it's wanting attention. So if I can lean into the emotion, wow, I notice I'm feeling really sad right now, and then bring it to the relationship, when there's a shared agreement of that, that's really rich and fertile soil for transformation.
Wow. Thank you so much for that, TJ. You know what what I like about you, TJ, is that when you talk, not only are you real, but you talk with such authenticity, and you talk with it's your tone of voice that really gets me. And your knowledge, of course, is just second to none. And hence you've written an amazing book. When was that book written? I'm trying to find out when it was written.
2017. It came out in 2017.
2017, and there's something else I've seen, which I know we've got a few professionals watching tonight as well. It says that you professionally train and certify conscious recovery counselors. who have you have 3 to 6 months program. How does that work? Because I've got a few therapists who might be interested in your work.
Yeah, so the history is I used to obviously see clients on my own, and I would do, before I developed the workbook and the online courses, I would walk them through conscious recovery. And I discovered it would take at least 3 months, and more accurately 6 months. So I had these conscious recovery coaching sort of packages to really help hold someone through the whole process. And, as everything started taking off and I was traveling more, again, pre-COVID, but we're about to be able to travel again. I'm holding that to be true. I didn't really have the bandwidth, if you will, to work with clients individually. So I started really, just to be really transparent, I looked at who are the most amazing therapists I know. And I actually went and approached them and asked them if I could train them on the conscious recovery method. So again, this is in the really early stages. Step one is taking the online course, Conscious Recovery for Professionals. And then at the end of that process, reach out to me, and then we can meet to talk about what it would mean to become a certified conscious recovery certified counselor or coach. So that the training is the online on wholehearted.org. And then at the end of the training, we would have a session to talk about what the next step would be.
When you say for professionals, do they have to be qualified counselors, or can it be a life coach professional? Can it be any kind of professional?
So the online resource is intended for anyone. It's going to be an extra tool, right? So if someone's a life coach, and, because if someone's a life coach and they haven't done any training in addiction and their client is experiencing addiction, it's going to be a resource for you. If someone's a spiritual leader, I myself am an agape ordained minister, and I know in spiritual community, there's addiction, right? And sometimes the spiritual leader hasn't really been trained or given some tools for addiction. So that's part of it. But, the primary audience is counselors and therapists that want just another tool. So to take the online course, it's open to anyone because it provides tools and resources. To become a conscious recovery certified counselor, that's why I want to meet with someone individually to look at what their education is, what their background is, to see if it's a good fit to become a certified coach.
Well, thank you very much, TJ. We've got a few minutes left, and I just feel so grateful that I've had the chance to meet you for the first time, and I think it's special when you meet someone for the first time on a platform like this, and I feel such at ease. It feels like it feels like I just love talking to you, and I love hearing you, and I guess all your clients must share that same sentiment. If you have any last words, what would you say to someone who's struggling right now in addiction and they want to get clean? What would you say to them?
I'll just start with something very simple. You are not broken. No matter what has happened in your life, no matter what you've experienced, and no matter what you've done, underneath all of that is this precious and whole and perfect being. And let's start creating a space where we can return to that, get support, get the help that you need. Saf mentioned this, but authenticity and transparency are a really important part of recovery. I know myself, I was ashamed to ask for help. And of course, the paradox is everyone knew I was struggling. I mean, I was 20. My parents knew I was spiraling downward, but I was still afraid to admit it, or I was still afraid to ask for help. So you're a whole and perfect spiritual being, and that you actually deserve a life with more connection, more happiness, and more purpose. And it's not only okay to ask for help, it's part of the healing, not only in your own life, but you're going to help others. So you deserve a life of recovery.
So is the key about loving yourself? Is that a big part of what you say? Love yourself first?
It is. And in our culture, sort of in pop culture, I think a lot of times we think that means our personality self, right? Like, I love my personality, I love myself. It's much deeper than that. Most of us have wounds that are much deeper than just our personality. So it's really about getting down. To me, it's about loving that little kid that's inside that is really needing to be seen, to be heard, and to create a space for their healing. So self-love is actually, to me, much deeper. It's loving all parts of myself, but most importantly, that little precious child that had those traumatic experiences, offering love to that younger self, I think is actually the deeper self-love as it relates to recovery.
Wow. Thank you very much, TJ. I'd hope you'd come on the show again in
I'd
due
be
course.
delighted.
I would love to have you on, and I'm sure all my viewers would love to see you again. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of messages asking about information for yourself. But guys, the website is going down on the bottom, www.tjwoodward.com. Please check out the website. Also, the Old-Hearted, is it oldhearted.com, is it? Check
.org.
that .org. Please check that website out as well. If you want to ask any questions, you can check me on my Facebook page, Saf Surgery. Contact me on my website, www.safs-surgery.com. But we're here to help. And what a message I hope you've given us today, TJ. I am so blessed, so humbled, and you're just a lovely guy. You are just such a lovely guy.
Oh,
I mean,
thank you.
some of the messages, I'm loving this. TJ Woodward speaks to every fiber of my being. Thank you for this evening. I heard it too. I've been waiting for this. This is what people are saying, and that's what you bring to people. And keep up the good work. I know we're going to be working together in many capacities, and I can't wait to learn from you and to grow with your knowledge. So thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you. It's been a deep honor.
And spiritual love from here to you all day long.
Thank
you very much. Cheers, guys. See you next week. Saf Surgery.